Sarah had been working at Riverside Dog Park for 6 years, and everyone thought she was just naturally gifted with animals. Until the day retired Marine Colonel Jackson brought his German Shepherd for exercise and watched her give a simple hand signal that made his highly trained military working dog immediately drop, roll, and assume attack position. That's when Jackson realized the dog park attendant was using classified canine commands that only special operations handlers should know. Welcome to Untold Valor Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of hidden expertise and the unbreakable bond between warriors and their four-legged partners, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served alongside the most loyal partners in military history. Riverside Dog Park occupied 12 acres of carefully maintained green space in suburban Connecticut, featuring separate areas for small and large dogs, agility equipment, water stations, and shaded seating areas where owners could socialize while their pets exercised. It was the kind of community amenity that made neighborhoods desirable and families happy to pay premium property taxes. Sarah Matthews had been the park's only full-time attendant for 6 years, maintaining the facilities, managing daily operations, and serving as the unofficial dog behavior consultant for hundreds of pet owners who brought their animals for exercise and socialization. She arrived every morning at 6:30 a.m. to unlock the gates, check equipment, and prepare for the steady stream of dogs and humans who would fill the park from sunrise to sunset. What made Sarah exceptional wasn't just her knowledge of dog behavior, though. She could predict aggression, identify anxiety, and solve behavioral problems that stumped professional trainers. It wasn't her physical ability to handle animals of all sizes, though she'd successfully managed situations involving aggressive dogs that would have required animal control intervention. It was her ability to communicate with dogs using methods that seemed almost supernatural to civilian pet owners. Sarah could make any dog sit, stay, or calm down with subtle gestures that most people didn't even notice. She'd redirect aggressive behavior with precise movements that transformed hostile animals into cooperative companions. She could assess a dog's temperament, training level, and emotional state within minutes of observation, providing insights that helped owners understand their pets better than years of expensive training classes. The dog park community had developed an almost religious faith in Sarah's abilities. When new dogs arrived with behavioral problems, owners were told to ask Sarah. When conflicts arose between animals, people called for Sarah to sort it out. When emergency situations developed, the first response was always, "Where's Sarah?" What the community didn't know was that Sarah's expertise with dogs had been developed during 8 years as a military working dog handler with the 75th Ranger Regiment, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan where she trained and worked with Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds in some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world. Sarah had enlisted in the Army at 19, initially planning to serve 4 years and use veterans' benefits to pay for veterinary school. But her aptitude for working with military dogs had led to specialized training at Lackland Air Force Base, advanced courses in tactical canine operations, and eventually assignment to special operations units that required the highest levels of skill and security clearance. Her last deployment had ended when a night explosion killed Rex, her primary working dog and partner for 2 years of combat operations. Sarah had survived with minor physical injuries, but the psychological trauma of losing Rex had convinced her to leave military service and find civilian work that didn't involve putting animals in life-threatening situations. The dog park job had seemed perfect for someone who understood animals but wanted to work in peaceful environments where the biggest dangers were minor squabbles over tennis balls and occasional incidents of dogs eating things they shouldn't. Sarah could use her expertise to help pets and their owners while avoiding the life or death responsibility that had defined her military career. For 6 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. Sarah maintained the park with military precision, solved behavioral problems that enhanced community life, and built genuine relationships with people who appreciated her dedication to animal welfare. She'd successfully created a civilian identity that honored her military training while serving a community that valued her contributions, but maintaining perfect operational security for 6 years required constant vigilance about which aspects of her canine expertise she could display without raising questions about her background. Sarah had to be good enough to solve problems effectively while being careful not to demonstrate capabilities that would make people wonder where civilian dog park attendants learned advanced animal handling techniques, until Colonel Jackson brought his German Shepherd to the park and changed everything. Colonel James Jackson, USMC retired, had been enjoying civilian life for 3 years since leaving active duty after 26 years of service, including multiple deployments and command positions that had earned him decorations for both leadership and combat effectiveness. He'd settled in Connecticut to be closer to his daughter's family and had adopted Thor, a 4-year-old German Shepherd from a military working dog retirement program. Thor had served 2 deployments in Afghanistan with Marine units, specializing in explosive detection and patrol work. He was intelligent, disciplined, and completely devoted to Jackson, but he struggled with civilian life in ways that were common among retired military working dogs. Thor was hypervigilant in public spaces, reactive to sudden noises, and sometimes displayed protective behaviors that made other dog owners nervous. Jackson had heard about Riverside Dog Park from neighbors who praised the facilities and especially recommended Sarah's expertise with challenging dogs. He'd been hesitant to bring Thor to crowded social environments, but Thor needed exercise and socialization that couldn't be provided in Jackson's backyard. On a Tuesday morning in October, Jackson arrived at the park during the quieter hours, when fewer dogs and owners were present. Thor immediately began the systematic scanning behavior that marked him as a working dog, assessing the environment, identifying potential threats, positioning himself to monitor multiple approach routes simultaneously. Sarah noticed them immediately, not just because Thor was obviously a well-trained German Shepherd, but because of the way both the dog and his handler moved. Jackson's posture, his automatic scanning of the environment, and his positioning relative to exits and sight lines marked him clearly as military or law enforcement. Thor's behavior was even more obvious. This wasn't a pet. This was a working dog whose training and instincts remained fully active despite retirement. Sarah approached them with the casual friendliness that she used with all new visitors, but she was also conducting the automatic threat assessment that had been drilled into her during years of working in combat zones where understanding the tactical situation could be the difference between life and death. "First time at Riverside?" Sarah asked Jackson, noting that Thor immediately shifted to a protective position between his handler and a potential unknown threat. "Yes. We're new to the area." Thor's a retired military working dog, so he's still adjusting to civilian environments. Sarah's assessment of the situation shifted immediately. Thor wasn't just a well-trained pet, he was a veteran like herself, dealing with the same challenges of transitioning from military service to civilian life. The hypervigilance, the protective positioning, the constant environmental scanning, she recognized all of it because she'd lived it herself. "What was his specialty?" Sarah asked, using the tone that military personnel used when discussing professional matters with other military personnel. "Explosive detection and patrol. 2 deployments, primarily route clearance and base security." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately what Thor had experienced and why his behavior was so different from typical civilian dogs. "How's he handling the transition?" "Better than some. Not as well as others. He needs socialization, but crowds make him nervous. Loud noises are still a trigger." Sarah made a decision that would reveal more about her background than 6 years of careful operational security. "Mind if I work with him a little? I have some experience with dogs who've had similar professional backgrounds." Jackson agreed, curious to see how a civilian dog park attendant would handle a retired military working dog. What happened next would change his understanding of both Sarah's expertise and the kinds of people who sometimes found civilian careers that utilized their military training in unexpected ways. Sarah positioned herself at a precise distance from Thor, close enough to demonstrate leadership, far enough to avoid triggering defensive responses. She made eye contact briefly, then looked away in the specific pattern that established dominance without challenging a working dog's protective instincts. Then Sarah gave a hand signal that Jackson recognized immediately, a subtle gesture involving hand position, finger orientation, and wrist angle that was part of classified training protocols used by Special Operations K9 units. Thor's response was instant and unmistakable. He dropped to the ground, rolled to his right side, and assumed the attack-ready position that he'd been trained to use when waiting for engagement commands from handlers under fire. Jackson stared at Sarah with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality had just been fundamentally challenged. The hand signal she'd used wasn't taught in civilian dog training classes or available in public manuals. It was part of classified tactical protocols that were restricted to military personnel with specialized K9 training and appropriate security clearances. "Where did you learn that command?" Jackson asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting direct answers to direct questions. Sarah realized that her 6 years of careful cover management had just been compromised by an instinctive response to help a fellow veteran, both human and canine, who was struggling with civilian transition. But looking at Thor, who was now calm and focused in a way that Jackson hadn't seen since they'd left military service, Sarah decided that operational security was less important than helping veterans who needed support. Same place Thor learned to respond to it, Sarah replied simply. Jackson studied Sarah with the systematic attention that he'd developed during 2 decades of assessing personnel, situations, and threats in environments where accurate evaluation could determine mission success or failure. Sarah's use of classified K9 commands was impossible to explain unless she'd received specialized military training that very few people possessed. "What unit?" Jackson asked, using the direct communication style that military personnel employed when cutting through civilian formalities to establish professional credentials. 75th Ranger Regiment. Military working dog handler, 8 years active duty. Jackson's expression shifted from suspicion to respect. The 75th Ranger Regiment was elite special operations, and their K9 handlers were among the most highly trained animal specialists in the military. If Sarah had served with Rangers, her expertise with dogs went far beyond anything civilian dog park attendants would normally possess. Deployments? 3. Afghanistan, primarily route clearance and direct action support. Jackson understood immediately what Sarah's service had involved. Rangers with K9 teams conducted some of the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan, using dogs to detect explosives, track enemies, and provide early warning for special operations units operating in hostile territory. "Your dog?" Sarah's expression tightened slightly. "Rex, Belgian Malinois. Lost him in our last deployment." Jackson recognized the emotional weight in Sarah's voice. Military working dog handlers develop bonds with their animals that civilian pet owners couldn't understand. Losing a dog in combat wasn't just losing a tool or even a companion, it was losing a partner who'd shared life or death situations and whose loyalty had been absolute. "I'm sorry," Jackson said, understanding that Rex's death was probably why Sarah had left military service and chosen work with civilian dogs rather than continuing in K9 specializations. "Thank you. Thor reminds me of him. Same intelligence, same dedication, same struggle with civilian life." Jackson looked at Thor, who was still in the position that Sarah's command had placed him in, waiting for further instructions with the patience that marked professional working dogs. "What can you tell me about helping him adjust?" Sarah's answer revealed both her expertise and her commitment to helping veteran dogs transition successfully to civilian life. Working dogs need structure and purpose. In civilian environments, that means finding ways to use their training productively rather than suppressing instincts that kept them alive in combat zones. Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah demonstrated techniques for helping Thor manage his hypervigilance, reduce his stress responses to civilian environmental factors, and find constructive outlets for his protective instincts. The training methods. she used were sophisticated applications of behavioral psychology that combined military working dog protocols with therapeutic approaches designed for PTSD recovery. Jackson watched Sarah work with Thor and realized he was observing expertise that couldn't be replicated by civilian trainers. Sarah understood working dogs at a level that could only come from shared experience in combat zones where human and animal survival depended on perfect communication and absolute trust. "How many other veteran dogs have you worked with?" Jackson asked. "Thor's the first military working dog I've encountered since leaving service. But I've helped about 30 civilian dogs whose behavioral problems were similar to what working dogs experienced during transition." Jackson understood that Sarah had found a way to use her military expertise to help both veteran animals and civilian pets while maintaining the cover identity that allowed her to avoid the complicated questions that came with revealing special operations backgrounds. "Would you be interested in working with other veteran dogs? There's a community of retired handlers who could use someone with your experience." Sarah had been avoiding exactly this kind of opportunity for 6 years, preferring the anonymity and low profile of civilian dog park work to the higher visibility that came with specializing in military working dog issues. But looking at Thor, who was calmer and more focused than Jackson had seen him since retirement, Sarah realized that her expertise could serve a community that needed support she was uniquely qualified to provide. "I'd be interested in learning more about what kind of help they need." Jackson's answer would open a door that Sarah had kept closed since leaving military service. "There are 12 retired military working dogs in this region, plus their handlers. Most of them are struggling with civilian transition issues that civilian trainers don't understand. Would you consider consulting on their cases?" 6 months after Colonel Jackson first recognized Sarah's military expertise, the Riverside Military Working Dog Transition Center had become a nationally recognized facility that provided specialized services for retired military working dogs and their handlers. The center operated from expanded facilities at the original dog park, with additional training areas, veterinary services, and housing for dogs awaiting placement with civilian families. Sarah served as the center's director, overseeing programs that included behavioral assessment, transition training, handler support, and ongoing consultation for military working dog retirement. The transformation had been remarkable in scope and impact. Sarah's expertise, combined with Jackson's connections in the veteran community and support from local government and private donors, had created something unprecedented: a comprehensive support system for military working dogs transitioning to civilian life. The center's programs address problems that had been largely ignored by traditional veterinary and animal welfare organizations. Military working dogs required specialized care that took into account their unique training, psychological conditioning, and the specific challenges of transitioning from high-stress operational environments to peaceful civilian settings. Sarah's team included 4 other veteran canine handlers, each specializing in different aspects of working dog care and transition. Together, they'd developed protocols that were being adopted by military installations and veteran organizations across the United States. "The dogs are easier to help than the handlers," Sarah told a group of visiting military officials during one of the center's regular briefings. "Dogs adapt to new environments quickly when they understand what's expected of them. Handlers often struggle more with the identity change that comes with no longer being actively responsible for their partner's mission readiness." The center had processed 63 retired military working dogs in its first 6 months, achieving a 94% success rate for civilian placement. More importantly, they'd provided support services for over 200 veteran handlers who were dealing with the complex emotions that came with transitioning working dogs to retirement. Sarah's own story had become part of the center's educational materials, demonstrating how military expertise could be successfully redirected toward civilian purposes. Her journey from Special Operations K-9 handler to dog park attendant to director of a national transition facility illustrated the potential for veterans to find meaningful careers that honored their service while serving civilian communities. "I thought leaving the military meant giving up my partnership with working dogs, Sarah explained during interviews with veteran organizations. Instead, I discovered that my expertise could serve a larger mission, helping other veterans and their dogs find peace together in civilian life. The center's success had attracted attention from federal agencies responsible for military working dog programs. Sarah had been invited to consult on policy development, training protocols, and retirement planning that would improve outcomes for both dogs and handlers throughout their service careers, but the work that meant most to Sarah remained the direct service she provided to individual dogs and handlers who needed support during their transition. Each successful placement validated her decision to make her military background public in service of a mission that only she and her team could accomplish. 2 years after Colonel Jackson first brought Thor to Riverside Dog Park, Sarah Matthews stood in the center's main training facility watching a dozen retired military working dogs learning to be pets while their new civilian families learned to understand partners whose loyalty had been forged in combat. Thor had become one of the center's most successful transition stories. His anxiety had been replaced by confidence, his hypervigilance had been channeled into productive alertness, and his bond with Jackson had deepened in ways that surprised both of them. Thor now served as a mentor for other dogs beginning their civilian transitions, demonstrating that working dogs could find happiness and purpose beyond their military careers. Sarah's work had evolved beyond individual consulting to include training programs for civilian families adopting military working dogs, education for veterinarians treating retired working dogs, and policy consultation for government agencies managing working dog retirement programs. The center had become a model that was being replicated in other regions, each facility directed by veteran canine handlers who understood the unique needs of working dogs and their human partners. Sarah's expertise was being multiplied through a network of professionals who shared her commitment to ensuring that no working dog or handler faced civilian transition alone. The military taught us that mission accomplishment and troop welfare were both essential, Sarah told the latest class of civilian families preparing to adopt retired working dogs. In civilian life, the mission becomes helping these dogs find new purposes that honor their service while bringing joy to the families who welcome them home. Sarah had discovered that her transition from military service to civilian life hadn't required abandoning her identity as a canine handler. It had required expanding that identity to include new kinds of service that honored both her military experience and her civilian community. The dog park where her story had begun remained an integral part of the center's operations, serving both veteran dogs learning to interact with civilian pets and community dogs whose owners benefited from Sarah's expertise. It was a place where military precision met civilian warmth, where working dogs learned to play, and where veterans found new ways to serve. Colonel Jackson continued to visit regularly, not just with Thor but as a volunteer who helped other veteran handlers navigate the complex emotions of transitioning working dogs to retirement. His recognition of Sarah's expertise had triggered changes that served hundreds of dogs and handlers across the country. Some partnerships end when military service ends, Sarah reflected during the center's second anniversary celebration. But the best partnerships find new missions that honor what they built together during service while creating new purposes that serve the communities they protect. Standing in the facility that had grown from a chance encounter at a dog park, surrounded by veteran dogs learning to be pets and veteran handlers learning to be civilian dog owners, Sarah had found something she'd thought was lost when Rex died in Afghanistan: the sense of purpose that came from serving others who shared the bond between warriors and their four-legged partners. The mission continued, just with different objectives, and the promise that no veteran human or canine would face the journey from military service to civilian life without the support of those who understood the unique challenges and opportunities that came with honoring service while building new lives dedicated to peace.